I'm very sorry that I can't be with you, not least hearing about the great dining options you have around where you are. But that aside, it's a great pleasure to be able to share some of the ideas we've been cooking up around public financial management. So let me tell you a bit of background of why we took on this this initiative of reimagining public finance. About 25 years ago now, well, 27 years ago, in fact, the World Bank produced the Public Expenditure Management Handbook, which was quite a seminal piece, and it codified a lot of discussion that had been going on around public financial management reform in the 1990s, and the three levels or three objectives of public financial management, that's aggregate fiscal discipline, strategic resource allocation, and operational efficiency, sort of had their place in that handbook. And early on in my career, I picked it up, and I've having worked for a few years in the Uganda Ministry of Finance, and I picked it up, and I thought, this is talking my language, and this I understand, and it talked to what we were trying to do. So we thought now. I found myself in DC working for the bank, that it was time to take stock and actually think about what has happened in the world of public expenditure management, public financial management over the last 25 years, this century. And a lot has happened. There's been a lot of investment by ministries of finance across the globe, including you all, I'm sure, in PFM reforms, in budgetary reforms, in accounting reforms, in audit reforms, and uh, and and there's been a lot of progress. There has been a lot of PFM systems are more sophisticated. They are the capacity of ministries of finance are stronger, and so a lot of progress has been made. But on the other side, there's a sort of sense that hasn't always had the impact that it might have had on on development outcomes, on public policy objectives and the achievement of public policy objectives. So that so and that sense of that we've been working very hard, but we assume that strengthening budgeting systems, strengthening accounting systems, etc., will have a positive effect on the achievement of policy priorities. But but there's a sense that it hasn't always been the case. So we started to think about how do we take stock and then and learn lessons. And we did two things. We did a bit of sort of research of looking at the literature and what is out there, and actually there you can see that there has been progress, but there isn't much evidence out there of the impact of PFM on development outcomes, or there are some positive correlations between PIFA scores and so the strength of PFM systems and say health outcomes and other social sector outcomes. So there's some association there, but we don't necessarily know that the strength in those effects, and that there's actually a causal relationship. But the other thing we did was we held a conversation with different sets of stakeholders around the world, different regional groupings like yourselves, although now, we're only now management to talk to you as a group, and also different disciplines from groups of budget officials to accounting and audit officials, to get their sense of what was of their experience. And again, they mirrored the kind of the sense that we had, that there's been a lot of progress in PFM reforms, but there's a feeling that there needs to be a stronger link to policy outcomes and development outcomes, that there's often a disconnect between PFM reforms and fiscal policy reforms, and that we need to look at them more holistically, and also focus on some of the key problems that exist, the key bottlenecks that are preventing the PFM systems from working and unlocking the potential for PFM to achieve development results. And that needs a more of a context specific set of solutions to some of these problems. So there's a general, and so when asking stakeholders whether they felt that public finance and PFM needed to be reimagined in some way, 97% of people said that at least in part there needed to be a relook on how we do things. So that's the flavor, and we held a conference a month or so ago to bring a lot of the people we've been talking to together, and that kind of reinforced the sense of the desire of the PFM community and restless desire to have an impact on public policy outcomes, and the need to relook at how we were doing things. So I think that reinforced our confidence that we do need to think about how better can we manage reforms in a way that unlocks the potential for PFM to have an impact on development outcomes. So that's the framing. Now, what I want to dive straight into is almost a pitch of what we're saying might be a different way of looking, a novel way of looking at PFM reforms. And we're calling it the outcome-led approach to PFM reform, very much so because it's starting with development outcomes. And we came up with 7 principles of what effective reform might look like. If we go to the next slide, please. Starting with reforms being outcome-led. That's to say that it should be focused on policy outcomes, but also on achieving results which contribute to those outcomes. It should be problem-driven, so that it actually focuses in on the key problems that are preventing public finance for having an impact on development outcomes. It needs to be locally led. Often reforms can seem like they're imposed by external actors like institutions like the World Bank, but actually the important thing is that reforms need to be driven by local stakeholders, can only be effective if they are driven by you in the room. And also often reform is siloed, and one of the things that we that is really important, that often when we're working, and I worked in the Ministry of Finance in a budget department, the accounting people are working in the accounting department, internal auditor in internal audit, and often we work in our silos. Similarly, line ministries and sector ministries are in their space. And really, we're saying that reform needs to be team-based, multi-stakeholder, bringing people together, and also people-centered. And that means that the sort of budgeting shouldn't just be for budget people or accounting systems for accounting people. We need to think about using the users of PFM systems and sectoral systems, and how we can take a more user-centric approach to reform, to think about how people in different spaces, whether it's citizens, whether it's health workers, whether it's an accountant sitting in a line ministry, how do they experience PFM and what do they need from their perspective? People-centered, user-centric, and then being focused on what is feasible and the key functions. So we often spend a lot of time, let's say, working on budget reforms, on performance-based program budgeting reforms, but we forget to think about what are the resource allocation changes that are needed to make service delivery better. And we focus on improving the form of the budget. We don't think about what changes and allocations need to be made, who needs to agree them, and how are we going to get them made. Okay. And then finally, we need the process needs to be flexible and iterative. So rather than saying we must do a reform in this way, we must learn and change and adapt as we're going on. So these 7 principles, a lot of them are not new, but bringing them together and deliberately trying to work to applying them is maybe novel, and we then think about how do we implement these principles. So we've tried to come up with what we're calling a 5-step approach to PFM reform. If we could have the next slide, please. Okay, so we have this 5-step process, and what I'll do now is go through it step by step, and then and then hopefully take you through how that works in these 5 steps. And next slide, please. The first step, if we could have the next slide, is to select a set of policies or a selective outcomes that the governments want to achieve. Okay, so in your government, you may have a set of policy priorities, and what we're saying, why not pick 3 or 4 of those policy priorities? It may be something to do with health and education. It could be energy. It could be to do with jobs and employment creation. So there could be a number of policy priorities, but pick a few of them and use those as the lens for working out the reform agenda. And then the idea is to work through these, identify for each of those policy objectives, what are the key public sector results, what are the public sector challenges, and map out the public sector context that this needs to take place in. So let me go to the next slide and take you through the thought process here with the example of education. So what we've come up with what we're calling an outcome-led analytical approach. And what we start with is not with PFM, but we start with a development outcome. Okay. So in this case, if we start and then we move on and then we work backwards towards the role of PFM. So let me go to the next slide, please, on the next click. So let's take the case of education and say the outcome we want to achieve is numeracy and literacy for all learners in school. Okay, so we want to make sure that all children in school are learning. So that's our outcome. So next, please. Then we want to say, what are the key public sector results to achieve that outcome? And that may be increased access and completion rates to education and enhanced education quality, which is equitably delivered, both regionally and to different groups, including marginalized groups. Okay, so we've got the public sector results we're trying to achieve. And then next, we need to think about the public sector challenges. So could you click again, please? So what are the public sector challenges to achieving these results? So often there's poor quality teaching, which means students fail to learn. There may be disparities in equity and access to education, or education policies are not aligned to delivery capability and are poorly coordinated. Okay, so these are sets of public sector challenges which are preventing the public sector results to being achieved. Okay, and then we need to think about the broader public sector context within which public finance achieves. So we can go to the next slide. Next click, please. It's not slide. So we need to think about both the policies and the public sector institutions that deliver those policies and the people involved as well, because the political economy of this is very important. And the feasible policy and it's very important that policy is both feasible, it can be achieved, and there's capability to deliver policy. And so we need to relate that to the public sector challenges that we see. And only then do we start thinking about what is the role of public finance and what is the role of PFM reform. So if you could click again. So public finance, which is a combination of fiscal policy and PFM, sits within the broader public sector. And the framework that we have asks 2 questions, which we'll now go on to in the next step. What is the role of public finance in these development outcomes? And what are the bottlenecks? What are the PFM bottlenecks that are preventing this from happening? So the first step of the outcome-led approach is to select some policy outcomes, identify the public sector results and the challenges in achieving those results. So that's the first step. And maybe we have education, maybe we have infrastructure, energy, we may have something around economic resilience and fiscal space. So you might have 4 or 5 different outcomes that you're working this through. So we go to the next slide. So then, once we've selected our policy outcomes, our development outcomes, then, and understand the context, then we need to assess the role of public finance in reaching the selected results. And and then ask those two questions, and then identify and prioritize what are the core PFM bottlenecks based on their contribution to public sector delivery challenges, and using that as a lens for PFM reform. So if this is the critical thing, that the PFM reform should focus on the key bottlenecks that impact on public sector challenges which are preventing the achievement of public sector results, because then we'll unlock the potential of public finance in development outcomes. And it's important that this is done in teams. So when you're identifying these bottlenecks, we need to think the stakeholders involved so that we can get the stakeholders involved in the room across different institutions to understand the causes of the bottlenecks. So let me go now a little bit more depth into this. Next slide, please. So in doing the research around the Reimagining Public Finance Initiative, we asked the two questions of what is the role of public finance and what are the key PFM bottlenecks around a number of different policy outcomes or development outcomes. So we did education, we did health, eliminating gender-based violence, the energy transition. We have one on the boil in terms of job and employment creation, and we did economic resilience and revenue mobilization as well. So we have these outcome studies, as we call them, and from that we asked in each of those studies, what is the role of public finance and what are the bottlenecks? And from that we got a categorization of 4 roles of public finance and 9 bottlenecks. 3 of the 4 roles of public finance are unsurprisingly very similar to those in the Public Expenditure Management Handbook and the 3 objectives that PIFA recognizes as well. But we added one, which was the role of public finance in contributing to commitment to feasible policy, which is both the policy planning and budgeting process can both contribute to more feasible policy, more affordable policy, but it also can build commitment to policy action as well, to implementing those policies. And the other roles are fiscal sustainability, resource mobilization and distribution, and performance and accountability and delivery. And then we also came up with a categorization of bottlenecks, nine key bottlenecks, which range from a lack of commitment to policy implementation, to unreliable funding for delivery, to fragmented data systems. So a set of PFM bottlenecks that offer a way of thinking about what to look for in terms of identifying these bottlenecks in a context situation. But let me now go into the process of how do we answer these 2 questions. So next slide. So I'll go back to the case of education. And so in answering what is the role of public finance, remember we had one of the common public sector challenges with poor quality teaching means that students fail to learn. And so, as an example, one of the problems one of the roles of public finance that was identified in the studies that we did was that public finance ensures that investments are made in key drivers of education quality, including teacher training, oversight, and curriculum development. So one of the things, so that's a key role. So it's not just about paying teachers; it's about public finance has a role in these elements which drive teaching quality. So that's a role of public finance in education. What about the bottlenecks? So we go to the next slide, please. So again, relating, and this is a lens we need to use if the public sector delivery challenge is poor quality teaching, and then what are the bottlenecks of preventing that? And one of the issues there may be imbalances in teacher deployment with shortages in underserved areas and surpluses elsewhere, which often persist in time. And also there may be inadequate funding for in-service teacher training and professional support, some of the drivers for learning that are identified. So flipping it around, those are some of the challenges that would need to be addressed to unlock the potential of public finance in education outcomes. But also note that addressing those challenges, often the cost of teacher training and reallocating teachers more efficiently, is not necessarily a major call on additional resources for government allocations. It's about better and more efficient allocation of existing teachers and existing resources. But one of the things that's important when you identify the problem is for together as stakeholders to unpack the underlying causes behind those problems, and this key element of this process. And that's why I have 5 whys on the right-hand side, because one of the elements of this, which is called a problem-driven approach, is understanding the underlying causes of the problems and asking why 5 times to the same problem is a way of drilling down to get to the real underlying causes. And asking why 5 times is a very simple tool. And when you get to the 5th why, you know you're getting close to the underlying cause. And then you can design reforms which address those underlying causes. Okay, so this identifying a priority set of key bottlenecks is the focus of reform. So let me go next to the next slide, please. So that is the outcome-led approach to sort of diagnosing the focus of reform, which is the PFM bottlenecks. Now one needs to develop a reform plan to resolve those bottlenecks. And that involves together thinking about what successful resolution of those bottlenecks look like and building a theory of change which says what are the changes required to address those bottlenecks. And then the stakeholders involved in those bottlenecks need to form reform teams to develop plans to address those bottlenecks. So if we go to the next slide, I can give a little bit of an example of what a theory of change looks like. So remember, we've identified a set of key bottlenecks to delivery. We need to identify the underlying causes in reform teams, and then think about the stakeholders involved and what are the changes required to address those the underlying causes behind those bottlenecks, and then developing an action plan which involves identifying the key steps to deliver those changes, and think about what are the reform results which embody the addressing of those bottlenecks. And the logic of this is that if you resolve those bottlenecks and make progress towards resolving those bottlenecks, that will contribute to resolving the public sector challenges and unlocking the potential of public finance to achieve development results. So that's developing the action plan, and it's important to do this in teams, but also ensure that there is authority to implement the reform. So one of the things is making sure that there's high-level technical and political buy-in to this reform agenda as well. So one of the things I should have said, to the point of identifying the outcomes, at the point of prioritizing the key bottlenecks, and then developing the plan, it's important that key authorizers are involved in making those decisions about the scope, what needs to be addressed. And that may involve both people within finance and planning ministries, but it will also involve the leaders in sectoral ministries responsible for these policies as well. And also thinking about one of the key roles that the Ministry of Finance plays through both PFM reform and the policy planning and budgeting process is that of a convener, as in you can bring people together through the budget process and the different stakeholders together to help drive these reforms and develop and drive these reforms. Let me go to the next slide, please. Okay, so we now have this action plan. So the next 2 stages are the most important. It's about actually getting teams getting their hands dirty and developing and implementing the solutions. So what we're saying is step 4, which is critical, is the co-creation of user-centric solutions, and then doing this in a way which brings together the different users from the systems, and also doing this in multi-sectoral teams. and applying a user-centered design approach, and also developing solutions which are aligned to existing capabilities and organizational realities. So sometimes we have a tendency to want the most sophisticated solution when something quite simple will actually do the job perfectly well enough. And also that means that more people will be able to use that system to do what is needed. So sometimes, an Excel spreadsheet is all you need to deliver what you need to do, but often digital solutions will be part of the solution. But it's important to do this in a user-centric way, and we live in a digital world, so a lot of these solutions will be digital solutions. But taking this user-centric approach and an approach which enables adaptation over time is important. So let's go to the fifth and most important step, which is driving action. Next slide, please. So key in this is to focus on the results, focus reform processes on the reform results and the steps to achieve reform results. One of the common problems in PFM reform processes is everyone is focused on their component and thinking about the training and the systems and the procurement of those systems and the like, and how to spend the money for capacity building. But what this does is say that in the reform process, let's focus on the reform results, resolving those bottlenecks, what that looks like, and the steps to achieving that. And that may just involve decisions being made, and it may not involve money at all. It's about making sure the right decisions are made to improve, to take the steps towards achieving results. And then working as teams, always working as multidisciplinary teams, being conscious of not working in your silo, but bringing people together, not just departments within finance and planning ministries, but also linking sector ministries, subnational governments, users of systems as well. And then iterating and adapting over time, and also making sure that you use existing capability. So there's often and I actually really dislike it when people say there's a lack of capacity. There's a lot of capacity, I'm sure, in the room I'm talking to, and it's the challenge is always how one unlocks a capacity you already have. And there's a huge amount of capacity you already have, and so how does one get it to work? And I think that's what we should be thinking about, rather than building capacity or saying local governments have a lack of capacity, et cetera, but how do we unlock that capacity? And another important thing is, because as ministries of finance and planning are custodians of the policy planning and budgeting process, you have a regular annual cycle that you can use to drive change and drive reforms incrementally over time. And let's take advantage of this comparative advantage that we have as people working in PFM of using that policy planning and budgeting cycle to deliver change, not just in terms of improving systems, but actually making that impact on outcomes. So that's the 5-step approach. If we could have the next slide, I think that's me almost done. So the 5-step approach is a way of operationalizing these seven principles, but it's not a blueprint. You can take bits and pieces that you like, and also you are all involved in reform. It's one way or the other already. There are different stages. So how you start to take the elements of this approach depends on your own context and what makes sense to you. But we're just putting it out there as an idea, and we also would be very grateful for your feedback. Next slide, just to tell you where we are in this process. This first phase that we've been involved in is concluding this year, which has been the conversation developing this new approach, and we're going to be, well, actually early next year, publishing some reports and some tools to enable early implementation. And then for the next 2 or 3 years, we'll be working with a number of countries to pilot this approach, and we welcome anyone who's interested in starting to implement some of the ideas of this approach, and And hopefully over time we can increase adoption of the approach, and also build evidence that addressing some of these bottlenecks actually does have an impact on development, on public sector results and development outcomes, excuse me, and solving some of these challenges. So now it's over to you. I'd be very interested to hear how you feel.